Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of Microsoft Flight Simulator, and today we are back with the follow-up review to ActiveSky. It has been a long time waiting. I promised this video out to be a while ago, but I kept seeing new things and new changes and new updates and learning new things about it, and I still don't have this thing completely figured out. But today I'm going to show you guys why my opinion of ActiveSky has changed significantly. So stick around because there's a lot to cover. If you are interested in acquiring any of my Overkill's tutorial guides from Microsoft Flight Simulator, or simply interested in supporting the channel, please consider joining us on Patreon. Patreon subscribers level tier 2 and above have access to all of my guides, as well as any future releases that come down the road. Patreon link can be found in the description below.
Overkill simulations, watch us as we fly.
Alright guys, so as we get into this, let's talk about what to expect from this video so you guys can get an understanding of where I'm at here. First off, this is a follow-up review. The initial review was a first impressions, and ActiveSky has gone through a lot of changes, a lot of updates, and also even in my first impressions video, there was a lot of settings that were dumbed down by default. So we're going to be talking about some of those. I'm going to be doing my best to make sure that we have chapters down below so you guys can skip to the sections that you feel are most beneficial to you. Gosh, I could not talk. Okay. But the big idea here is that we're going to be talking about the differences in clouds and why those cloud layers are different and what the advantage to each are. We're going to be talking about the turbulence model and why in previous videos we actually noticed very similar behavior. We're going to be talking about comparing it from real-world exercise, as other content creators have done, meaning showcasing what's really outside, to what the sim is depicting and why that's not necessarily a fair way to ride that. And then we're going to be talking, of course, about wind and some of the limitations for different types of turbulence that Microsoft Flight Simulator cannot yet even do. Okay, so I'm going to do my best to break all that down and show a true comparison as to what the big differences between ActiveSky and Microsoft Flight Simulator are. I also want to start this out by reminding everyone I purchased ActiveSky with my own money. It was not given to me. I was not solicited for a review. These opinions are of my own volition, and that's why I decided to make this video, because I know it is a very controversial software. So let's get started. Alright, so first thing we're going to do here is just sort of establish a baseline here. We're taking off here at Tucson, Arizona. Winds are 280 at 8 knots, gusting at 17. So our first goal here for today is we're just going to sort of get an idea of how it's flying right now, what the weather's like. Easy, baby. Alright, come on, come on. Come on, honey. Come on. There you go. Nope, get up. Come on, fat mama. Let's go. All right. All right, so like I said, we're just kind of idea here is to get a baseline. This is default Microsoft Flight Simulator. ActiveSky is not even running at the moment in any way, shape, or form. So let's start talking first about turbulence, because I think turbulence is the big one. And first, everything that we're going to talk about here, guys, is going to be in just informational for a minute. So first off, when it comes to terrain level turbulence, meaning wind and things like that impacting, creating turbulence based on the surrounding region. For example, as you can see here, we're in Tucson, Arizona. Tucson, Arizona is a bowl. It literally has mountain ranges on all sides of it. The simulator does not do terrain-induced turbulence as of yet, is my understanding from multiple sources. Hang on a second, let's get those bad boys up. Okay, why is that important? That's important because increasing wind and things like that isn't necessarily going to generate turbulence as well, and it's important to remember that that was in one of the comments that even I made and had to get a little bit more research on. Keep in mind, I am not a real-world pilot. So when it comes to the expectation of turbulence, it's going to be in the Microsoft Flight Simulator world strictly on thermals at the moment. We will get some based on wind, but that's also why the aircraft fly into the wind. That's why we take off and land into the wind, is to reduce that turbulent effect on approach and takeoff. So you guys can see here, the aircraft's certainly rocking. As we get closer to the mountain edges, what we will experience is an increase in thermals. So we're going to get a bit of a bouncier ride and things like that. Alright, so with ActiveSky, why did we not see in the previous video a significantly improved experience when it came to turbulence? Turbulence is one of those things where, especially as, again, this is through, keep in mind guys, it's been about 3 weeks since I did that review video. So in the last 3 weeks, I've been doing a lot of research, and the biggest reason why is because what they were finding is that non-real world pilots, with the turbulence set at its highest capability, were finding it too frustrating and finding in themselves in a position where they had an inability to control the aircraft and understand how to fly through that kind of turbulent weather. So by default, what ActiveSky did is they, quote unquote, reduced the turbulence level by default. So even though we were expecting to get, you know, like I was, for example, was expecting to see a big change in the way that turbulence was handled and the way that the aircraft was being bounced around, etc., we weren't going to see that because of the nature of the default settings. And this is one of the things that I did make sure to mention in my previous video, was that we had to make sure that we took the time to really dive into the settings within ActiveSky to get the most realistic experience. Okay, so we're going to be showing that in the next chapter. If you guys watch for that on the time bar, I will show ActiveSky Turbulence comparison. Everything we're going to be talking about here right now is in Microsoft Flight Simulator default. All right, so in the default configuration for Microsoft Flight Simulator, you can see turbulence is actually handled pretty well. It's certainly nothing to gripe about or complain about. But it's definitely, what I have noticed, the best way to describe it, it's very similar all the way across the board. The impacts and effects are always the same. And I don't mean that, I don't even know if I'm verbalizing that correctly, guys, so please don't take that as an insult to Microsoft Flight Simulator. It's not meant as one at all. But it feels like the bouncing and the movement is always the same kind of. Like, I can tell you guys right now, after real world, in real life, being able to fly a Cessna 172 over these mountains, we should be getting the crap kicked out of us right now. Okay, I'm telling you right now, this little range right here sucks at this altitude. Two things that I'll tell you about Tucson right now that make it really brutal. So one is, again, as we discussed earlier, the fact that we're in a giant bowl. The biggest thing about Tucson, though, is the thermals. The worst times to fly in Tucson is any time in late morning all the way through mid-afternoon into the evening. You either want to fly very, very late at night or very, very early in the morning if you want a nice, smooth flight out of Tucson. Because by 9 a.m., the ground is heating up, the wind is picking up because of the thermals, and it turns into a bouncing trampoline until you clear the mountain ranges or clear about 9,000 feet, if not a bit higher. So it gets pretty nasty around here. So like right there, that was good, but notice where we were. We were right off the edge of that mountain, which I told you guys as we were approaching the mountains, that as we approached the mountain sides, we were going to pick up those thermals and it was going to get bumpy. So that is the expectation for Microsoft Flight Simulator with turbulence. Now let's get into clouds for just a minute, okay? So now we're going to start bouncing out of live weather and let's just talk about some clouds. Let's move this over here. And let's go to few clouds. Notice the size of the clouds. Notice the shapes of them. Those big hammerhead, dark, wet clouds. These, my understanding is, these are basically miniature storm clouds. And they require a very specific set of parameters in order to create them. Alright, so now let's go to scattered clouds. Again, same thing, big hammerhead, giant, big, huge, puffy clouds, all reaching the top. They're gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous, right? And that is one thing you can't take away from Microsoft Flight Simulator. Microsoft Flight Simulator is a stunning simulator. I have said it in multiple videos that it's absolutely gorgeous. Let's get into broken. There we go again. That same kind of shape, just more of them, more pronounced. And again, these are definitely the kind of clouds, my understanding is that real-world pilots try to avoid flying through. It's fun. It's cool to get right next to one like this and skate right across it, but it's not particularly what they do in real life. They typically try to avoid them. I guess these can be very, very violent, and you can lose all visual and spatial awareness very, very quickly in them. But again, if we go all the way back again, coming back to the few clouds, all those same shapes. So it's important to keep an eye on that. Now, you still have a bit of different ones up on the higher altitudes, but even they represent sort of the same kind of shape. And I think that's what was one of the bigger problems. So if we go high level clouds, even there you can still kind of see it. It still looks pretty. It's not that it's necessarily wrong across the board, but I would say it's the bigger clouds that tend to be more incorrect. So, and then of course overcast, things like that. But if we go through overcast, and even if we go on top of the overcast clouds, we're going to see that big, puffy, giant, huge, full clouds, okay? One of the issues that we had in regard to clouds with ActiveSky was we felt it wasn't realistic and some of the edges were a little too sharp. But what it was actually trying to do was generate a more realistic sense of what clouds are actually up in the sky versus Microsoft Flight Simulator. Now, let's touch on that for a minute because there's two options when running ActiveSky. The first one is you have the default mode, right? Where ActiveSky, we're going to refer these two modes as active and passive. Active mode, ActiveSky does everything. It generates the clouds, the wind, the thermals, the turbulence. I probably shouldn't have said thermals, but it generates the entire weather environment, right? Where in passive mode, Microsoft Flight Simulator does everything visually. Everything you see outside, all of the clouds, everything like that, the sunsets, blah, 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 the little elves running across the bottom of the floor that you try to strafe with your propeller. Whoa, that got dark. That's all done through Microsoft Flight Simulator. But, again, all of the environmental factors, wind, heat, turbulence, blah, 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 is done with ActiveSky. There's two things that you guys need to understand when using these two methods. Sorry, I didn't mean to hit the mic. When using those two methods, if you are in active mode, okay, when you go into active mode, your in-game weather system should switch to live weather should be turned off. It should turn off automatically. While in active mode, in ActiveSky, if we were to turn it on, you have just broken ActiveSky. So please keep that in mind. That is another tip that I'm throwing in there sort of in the middle of this. You have just broken ActiveSky and you need to either close ActiveSky completely and relaunch it, which I would actually recommend if you're going to do that, just do the whole works, or go to passive mode, okay? So that's the first part I wanted to tip you guys about that. But, so ActiveSky essentially is trying to generate a more realistic cloud layer that Microsoft Flight Simulator isn't necessarily able to do. Okay, so now that we've talked about some of the changes and talked about some of the things that are different, let's go ahead and get into ActiveSky for a second, look at some of the settings that I want you guys to be aware of so you can understand the comparison when we come back into the simulator and run everything with ActiveSky. All right, let's go check it out. All right, guys, so as we have launched ActiveSky now, you guys can see that it's loading in the current weather system based on current time. Let's talk about a couple of the settings that are crucial to increasing your experience, okay, and enhancing the overall experience. Keep in mind, guys, ActiveSky for Microsoft Flight Simulator comes in at right around $30 US of memory serves. Again, I want to stress, this video is not solicited. I purchased ActiveSky with my own money. I just learned more about it and realized that it's a lot better than what I even initially thought it was on my initial review. So let's go into the options and a couple things right off the bat. I have already spoken to, so how all this came to be, to give you guys a little bit of backstory, is I was in contact with one of the beta testers who is a real world pilot of 25 years plus, who shared a lot of this information with me and is in direct contact with the developer. We are also on the latest beta version of the product at the time of making this video, which is May the 18th. And so keep that in mind as well. One of the biggest things that I had a problem with was this button here, realism mode, because that's what I was using. And it turns out realism mode isn't so realism. And that is because, like we were talking about, a lot of the wind settings and turbulence settings are actually dumbed down because people were finding it uncontrollable and just taking away from the simulation experience because non-real world pilots, as should be expected, didn't understand how to fly in those kind of intense and turbulent conditions depending on what was happening. So first, let's come down here. We're going to talk about a few options. So first, let's go into cloud options. I believe this is the first one that I wanted to. Maximum cloud turbulence, you guys can set your turbulence. You guys can see I have that set at 100. I have that maxed out. So the turbulence that you should be expecting to experience while in the cloud should be at your maximum. All right. If you're finding that when you're flying through clouds, it's too much, this is one of those settings that you can bring down. There was another one. Hang on. This one's actually pretty cool, but that's not what I was looking for. Depiction smoothing rate. So this one is another one you want to watch for. This sets the relative rate and speed of smoothing between cloud and weather changes in the sim. Lower rate, slower transitions. But you're obviously going to, what my understanding is, the slower the transition, the less quote unquote accurate the weather may be at that particular location in comparison to what you might find in the real world. However, it creates a smoother experience, so less of a noticeable change inside the simulator. Because remember that any simulator with any third-party weather injection is going to have to continuously re-inject that weather system into the sim. Okay, so that's the first thing. So keep that in mind. So if you want highly accurate weather systems, but you don't mind the sudden jolt and change, you want that up at max. If you don't, then you want to bring that down. I find leaving it right about 50 seems to work really, really well. Next thing, turbulent effect scale. This is the one that I was telling you guys. If we go into realism mode, let me do that. Let's have it restart. Look what it did already. Kicked it down to 60. And if I remember correctly, when I actually first launched it, it was even lower than that. Okay, now we have to relaunch ActiveSky, so let me just get that done and over with. But essentially what it does is it takes it down lower than even what the maximum capability is. Okay, sorry about that. I had to get a drink, guys. My throat was dry as hell there. So if we come back into that turbulent effect scale, you can see it's still only at 60. Higher values increase the realized turbulence effect on the aircraft. Affects any all turbulence intensities for all turbulence types. What I have found and what the real world pilot that I have been speaking with have also found, and I agree with, I have tried it at 100 and I've tried it at 60. I've tried it down at 30, and I believe the default is 50. If I remember correctly, default, you just launch it, go into the sim, is 50. But the one that I like the most is 80. It seems to be really, really nice. It gets really, really intense at times, but not too much. At 100, depending on the weather system and the situation you're in, it'll kick your tail. It'll kick your tail. So keep that in mind there as well. So that's a big one. You bring this up and your turbulence and the turbulence effect far surpasses Microsoft Flight Simulator that we're going to see here in a minute. And again, it's all situational too. You have to keep that in mind as well. Let's see here. What was the other one? There was another one. Oh, your maximum wind shear settings. I left that at 100. That's maxed out. Maximum surface wind. Here's another one. Sets the highest possible wind speed in knots at the surface. I'm pretty sure we're good at 100 knots. Any higher than that, actually, I don't even know a single aircraft where we would ever want to fly in that. And then you have things like this that are there. But what else was I looking for? There was one other one. Give me a second. Was it fog layer? No. I can't remember what it is now. There was one more. Oh, I do want to actually show you guys something. This is actually pretty cool too. ATIS, check this guys out. Or check this guys out, man. If you want live ATIS, based on where you're at, make sure you guys tick this as well. It gives you a voice ATIS system based on the tuning of your radio. If you read this very carefully, guys, because each frequency does something slightly different. Okay, so if you import a flight plan, it will give you either your departure or your arrival airport ATIS information, or if I believe it's a 122.2, it gives you the closest weather station to the aircraft's current position. So it can continuously be updating based on where you're at. So that is a really cool feature, guys. Wanted to make sure you guys knew that was there. So now that's here. Let's go ahead and relaunch the sim. We're going to go to a couple different weather conditions. I do recommend you guys check this out as well. This is a pretty cool thing. You can actually search for different Wrong one. Search for different weather scenarios, and that's a map, not that. And then let's see here. I think that's everything that I need. Yep, we want live active weather. Oh, that's right. Weather mode, sim depiction mode. So this is what I was talking about. Currently, we are in passive mode. So I'm actually going to switch that over to active. Okay. And this is the one where if you change this, if we turn live weather on inside the sim with active mode enabled, it will break the ActiveSky. Okay, so at that point, ActiveSky have to be closed and relaunched. Okay, so let's go ahead and launch the sim now. I'll see you guys in there in a minute. Okay, well that's slightly annoying. Microsoft Flight Simulator, even though I selected the other runway, put us on 1-2, which is wrong. As you guys can see, we are taking off with the tailwind. So, oh well, we'll just make it work. That happens sometimes. All right, so again, this is 100% ActiveSky. Did I? Nope, I did not. Get in there. All right, so let's fly. This will be a slightly different scenario for the start. We'll turn back around and make sure we get headed in the right direction. So already, I can tell you we are seeing more consistent turbulence than what we were seeing with the default Microsoft Flight Simulator weather system. Now, we are in a pretty tight turn here. We are coming back over, trying to get back to basically where we flew before to try to keep it as fair and accurate. And it's not... Fair is such a bad term. I'm not trying to shoot one down over the other. Just get a realistic comparison of what the two actually offer. So, yeah, that... Bad verbiage. I'm not... Microsoft Flight Simulator has come a very, very long way since its inception, so I don't want to take away from that either. Alright, so now... So if you guys compare the two segments, the aircraft is definitely... How do I put this? It's requiring more control. Having to pay much more attention to what is going on with the aircraft than I did on the default flight, on the default weather system. Not necessarily in a bad way, nothing crazy. I mean, you guys are watching it. It's just, it is requiring more control. We are seeing more activity against the surfaces of the aircraft. But it's like, it's not game breaking. It's not, I don't know, I guess it kind of is game changing. Yes, it is. But it's not like anything extreme that we're experiencing, but based on the current weather conditions, we probably shouldn't be. But it is definitely noticeable. The movements themselves feel a bit more accurate, feel a bit smoother, more of what turbulence would be expecting in this kind of situation. Let's get back over here where we were before. By the way, guys, we are using Beam Eye Tracker as our head and eye tracking source. It is a $30 piece of software that uses any webcam. Link to it down in the description below if you guys want to check it out. It is fantastic. I have not had any problems with it since I started using it, and I haven't gone back since. Alright, so as we get closer to the mountains, And notice the difference in oscillation. It's not, or even in bounce. It's not the same repetitive motion. I'm actually getting different kinds of motion. We're getting different experiences as to what's actually happening with the plane in comparison to what we saw before. Like I said before, it sort of just felt like the same motion over and over again. And that could be, it could just be perception on that too. It's a hard one to tell. But so my overall experience, and all I can do is tell you guys what I've gone through, how I've used it. Again, it's been 3 weeks since I did my last review on it. I've been waiting on purpose. I wanted to make sure that I'd really gone through the paces. I've really given it a fair run. So speaking to Turbulence, I think both are pretty good. Microsoft Flight Simulator definitely suits the average simmer, but if you're looking for something a bit more realistic, a bit more unpredictable, or for example, let me back that up, maybe a bit more predictable based on your knowledge of the weather system and what you should expect to see when flying, like for example, real world pilots, I think are going to benefit from this the most. You're going to get a much better experience out of ActiveSky. Again, for your average simmer, from the turbulence aspect, Microsoft Flight Simulator is probably more than just enough. It's probably perfectly fine. If you're someone who's looking for a much more realistic turbulent experience, I would recommend ActiveSky. So now let's go, we're going to bounce around a little bit. There's a good one. That was a fun one. And yeah, before we jump out, like just sort of watch it. Just the overall way that the aircraft moved there is different from what it does with the default weather system in Microsoft Flight Simulator. And for the most part, like guys, my hands are off the controls right now. So for the most part, let me level it out though. For the most part, with Turbulence, my understanding is you sort of just let it fly through. You don't always have to be counteracting. Sometimes just a matter of letting the aircraft travel through it and waiting for it to sort of sort itself back out. Like right now, my hands are off controls. And we are maintaining a nice, relatively level flight. Oh, now something kicked the right wing up. But you guys get the idea. All right, so now let's take a look at some cloud layers. All right, so now we are back with ActiveSky. I'm going to lock the camera for a minute. There we go. Now, let's make sure that we all understand once again, the objective here is not to say Microsoft Flight Simulator sucks, it does a terrible job. No. The idea here is to remember that Microsoft Flight Simulator does a very similar cloud over and over again, just different levels of intensity of that same cloud, but it is a very beautiful generation of clouds. Okay, where here, you guys probably have already seen it. We're not seeing those big puffy bubbles anymore. We're not seeing any of those large, gigantic hammerhead, gonna, turn your wings inside out clouds anymore. Okay, when we come up over the top, really ask yourself, guys, as you fly around, how often you see clouds like this, looking like this in Microsoft Flight Simulator without a third-party weather system. You really don't. Okay, I don't want to turn live weather on right now because we have ActiveSky running. And remember what I said, if we do that right now, it will break it. So I don't want to do that. But I showed you guys a couple of all those examples in the beginning of the video. And you guys can see for yourself. Microsoft Flight Simulator in all those 3 settings that we looked at did not generate any cloud layers that looked like this. Okay, now if we come back down, whoa. Even looking at the bottom layer here, you can see it's a bit flatter. Clouds are a bit thinner. Let's come back up over here. There we go, right there. You can see that flat layer, but what we normally see in Microsoft Flight Simulator is you'll get this flat layer, but once you get up top like we just were, it's those big giant clouds that we talked about again. All right, I'm going to show a couple more examples of different cloud layers that we see in ActiveSky and what that difference is. All right, so here's another really good example that we were talking about earlier about the differences between Microsoft Flight Simulator and ActiveSky. This is what I was trying to show you guys earlier. So we would probably call this more what? High scattered, maybe high broken, maybe sort of in between, right? But sort of think about what we were seeing in Microsoft Flight Simulator versus what we were seeing here. In Microsoft Flight Simulator, again, those big, giant, towerless clouds that always look absolutely gorgeous, but again, like I said earlier, require actually a very specific set of parameters in order for those types of clouds to take place. Where here, no, they're not as pretty. They're just not. They're just not the same same clouds that we all love to see. But that's sort of the point. Microsoft Flight Simulator, again, coming back to that, is very, very beautiful. It is an incredibly gorgeous simulator. They did an absolutely amazing job making it awe-inspiring. You know, I have said on so many occasions, you know, when I've been flying, especially in VR, you know, coming across those big giant clouds and things like that as you peek through the canopy is gorgeous, but not necessarily realistic. You can see how much thinner these clouds are. They're not quite as exciting as what we were seeing before, but you guys can get an idea of what some of the differences is. This is more of a realistic example of the kind of cloud layer you would expect to see based on the current weather conditions. Other videos that showed a comparison between real world and ActiveSky were kind of unfair because they were showing full cast over. They were showing full overhead and things like that versus showing the differences and unfortunately the less attractive clouds. You know, here in Tucson, for example, the big towers clouds that we were showing earlier, those big hammerhead clouds, we actually don't get them very often here. And before anyone even thinks of arguing with me, I've lived here for 40 years, so don't start. My last video, I said something similar and someone tried to argue with me. It's like, dude, I live here, okay? It's sort of hard to argue with the person who lives here, but anyway. So we don't get them very often, and that's important to mention that because we get them a lot in the sim. Every single time that I'm looking at cloud layers in the sim, that's what I'm seeing. So as we start climbing through these, you guys can sort of get an idea. There isn't any of that big, large, thick cloud layer that everyone likes to go through. It's all very thinned out, very broken out, very spread out, but a much more realistic experience to what you would see in the real world. And then as we peek through, now that's still beautiful. That is an absolutely gorgeous shot there, in my opinion. But again, not the big monstrous clouds that we're used to seeing inside of Microsoft Flight Simulator. But still pretty nonetheless. Okay. So I hope this video sort of sheds some light as to what to expect from Microsoft Flight Simulator versus ActiveSky. Now that it's been a few weeks, by the way, ActiveSky has updated multiple times. There's been a ton of different improvements. There's still a ton of information, you guys. There is so much information still that I have not gone over that exists inside the documentation. I will say this, if you decide to purchase ActiveSky, make sure you read through the doc. Make sure you go through all the instructions. Take your time with it. If you are looking for something that's just plug and play and off you go and it's going to be absolutely fantastic, you're missing out. It's not going to be what you were looking for. It's not going to be the experience that you were wanting. So make sure that if you decide to purchase ActiveSky, you're willing to sit down, maybe a day or two, maybe 3 or 4, and really tweak it and get it to where you like it and you're getting the most out of it. If you take that time, you will absolutely love ActiveSky. If you don't take that time, you're just looking for a plug and play, I will be completely honest with you, you're probably better off sticking with Microsoft Flight Simulator. So it really depends on the kind of effort you're wanting to put into that. And that's totally your choice. If you are perfectly happy with the way Microsoft Flight Simulator's weather system is, and you really don't have any great thing that you're looking forward to move, then I would say you're happy with Microsoft Flight Simulator. Stay with that. If you're looking for a much more immersive, much more realistic, maybe not as pretty experience, then that's where you would go to ActiveSky. Now, do remember passive mode. We didn't show it because I didn't really feel a need to. Passive mode will make sure everything about the way the aircraft is handling, everything about how you are feeling in the cockpit is ActiveSky. All of the visuals will be Microsoft Flight Simulator. So there is also still a way to get all of the wind, turbulence, terrain options, you know, etc. Excuse me, not terrain options. You guys know what I'm talking about. Voice options, radio options that come with ActiveSky while maintaining the visual fidelity that you see in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So that option is there as well. As always, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave any questions, comments down below, and I'll do my best to answer them. Stay safe and healthy, folks. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll catch you in the next one.